Please welcome our next speaker to the stage, Professor Staffan Lindberg from the V-Dem Institute.
Good morning. Here we're going to talk about, trends for democracy and autocracy in the world. Democracy winning and losing at the ballot. Why? Because we've seen in the last couple of years now a number of places where democracy has won at elections, right? In Poland, Brazil, Zambia in 2021. So there are some good news out there where people, parties, media are using elections to regain democracy and stop autocratization, but also losing because autocratization in the world often starts with leaders, parties winning relatively democratic elections and then undermine democracy. Like Orban in Hungary, Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey. We can go down the line. I'm speaking based on V-Dem data, Varieties of Democracy, 31 million data on democracy and associated indicators from all over the world. It's based on the largest scientific collaboration perhaps ever. It's over 4,200 scholars and other experts from 180 countries that contribute with the raw data on how things are with journalist harassment in the Philippines or political parties in Ecuador and so on. So it's not white men in their 50s deciding how democratic Zambia or Indonesia is, right? Where are we? Well, here's the thing, right? This is our liberal democracy index. It goes from 0 to 1. Here's the development in the world last 50 years. So we had this wave of democratization, right? That started with 25th of April, 1974, Carnation Revolution in Portugal, right? And then the world, and this end of the world, they spread across the world. We had the end of the Cold War with the fall of the Berlin Wall, peaking here, starting to slide back, but it's not that much, perhaps. This is based on country averages, right? One country, level of democracy plus level of democracy in country 2, averages by 2, and so on. What does that mean? It means that a country like the Seychelles, with 90,000 inhabitants out there in the Indian Ocean, get the same weight as India with 1.4 billion people. Right? But how much democracy there is in the world, does Seychelles mean as much for the world as India? Maybe not. And after all, democracy is ruled by the people, right? So one man, one vote, well, one person, now women also, that's great, right? One person, one vote. So we can think of how much democracy there is in the world for the average global citizen. And then we weigh these by population size, and then it looks like this. Same positive development, and then a much greater sliding back. Then if we draw a red line back, we're actually to 1985 in terms of how much the average global citizen has in terms of democracy. We can weigh by different metrics. Territory, we also have a much greater slide than the raw country averages. So big countries with big populations. And then look at this now, by GDP. So this tells you something about how much democracy is losing out in terms of economic power. Right? And we focus a lot on the population-weighted issues, measures, and by that we've had at least 15 years of dramatic decline in the world. Freedom House says 18 years. I'll show you another metric with 20 or even 30 years. Depends on how you calculate these things. Right? But we're now in a world where 71% of the world population live in autocracies, and that's up radically in the last 20 years. And when countries autocratize, what is happening? What is changing, and what is changing the most? You heard some of this from Antonio before. Here, we go down from the liberal democracy index to components of democracy, different aspects, like, freedom of association, freedom of expression, still indices. And with just simple metric. How many countries are getting better? How many are getting worse in the last 10 years? This is from 2013, right? And just for clean elections, 23 countries were getting better and only 10 getting worse. If you're above this line, then it's getting better in more countries than it's getting worse. That's 2013, 10 years ago. Compare that to 2023, end of the year. Boom. Right? They're almost all below the line. And worst of all out here, freedom of expression, where you also have media freedom. But now also we see that clean elections are being undermined in more and more countries. So, what are the trends? Well, what are the countries that are changing right now? So we talk about countries that democratize, blue countries, including Brazil, great, right? But not that many, and they're hard to see because many of them are very small. Red countries are in a process of democratic decline or autocratization. And the greater the color, or sort of deeper the color is, the more they have slid back. It's not about where they are in terms of levels, but how much the magnitude of change. You can see the point here is really that it's a global trend, right? It's all regions of the world. It's global north, global south, east and west. It's everywhere. And now, 35% of the world population, or almost 3 billion people, live in countries that are autocratizing. Democracy is derailed and often done away with, up from 7% 20 years ago. This is how it looks in the same again, 50 years here. Blue line, countries democratizing. You see it was going up. Here in the mid-1990s, 70 countries moving ahead on democracy at the same time. Right? That's when we were happy. We were looking forward to the future. Frank Fukuyama wrote the book, The End of History. Liberal democracy has won. And then, boom, right? 18 now. And at the same time, already here in the mid-1990s, but we didn't know about that then, right? But at the same time, they were going down. Number of countries autocratizing was starting to go up, and then really speeding up. And here's where Maria got attacked, 2016, up now, 42 there. So this 47 a couple of years ago, 42 now. This is a larger number of countries that we have ever recorded since 1900 that at the same time are in autocratization. They also have the largest share of population, I could show you that, ever. It's also the largest percentage of countries in the world ever to autocratize at the same time. So it's really worrying, and here it's at least 20 years and maybe even 30 years since this trend started. Here's another part of this that's really worrying. So you can start to autocratize without being a democracy, like Putin in Russia. Russia wasn't really a democracy when he came into power. So it's an autocracy that's getting worse. But 28 of the 42 countries right now in change were democracies when the decline started, and only half of them are now still democracies. So the probability that if you start a process of autocratization in a country that's democratic, that it will survive is fairly low. I want to talk just 2 minutes about some of the things that relate to what this panel before us talked about. And that goes back to previous year's report, Defiance in the Face of Autocratization. We looked at the relationship between disinformation, polarization, and autocratization. We've done that also in previous year's report for about 3-4 years, taking different takes at this. This is how it looks like. Even very simple metrics, just mean change, Countries that are autocratizing, governments' spread of disinformation goes up. In democratizing countries, it goes down. Political polarization in autocratizing countries goes up. Democratizing countries go down. We can look at it across the world with sort of different countries. So here's the same time of graph, just comparing government spread of disinformation 2012 with 2022 here. If you're above the line, things have gotten worse. More government spread of disinformation. Red-colored countries are countries that were autocratizing. You see all of them, how they are clustered up there. Here's political polarization, same thing, it's gone up, and the red-marked countries are autocratizing. It also shakes out in countries over time, right? So here you have 5 of the then top 10 autocratizers: Brazil, Hungary, Poland, Serbia, Turkey. Indicators of polarization and disinformation go up, and democracy goes down. Go up, democracy goes down. This is not cherry picking. This is how the general pattern looks like. It's very clear. This and a lot of other studies on these relationships that we've done, others have done as well, tell me at least one thing. Wannabe dictators spread disinformation en masse, both at home and abroad. They do that because they know it works. It works to spread polarization and heighten it to what we call toxic levels. To levels when you can start to say that your political opponents are enemies. Enemies of who we are. Enemies of us as a people. Enemies, and that's the kicker, of the nation. That's a war metaphor. Because what do you do with enemies of the nation? We know that from the 1930s. This relationship is so incredibly strong, the spread of disinformation, increasing polarization, and then autocratization, that there are a few things where we find those strong correlationships and evidence over time in countries. There's some good news, right? There are countries democratizing. Okay, fewer, right? But you know, there are 18 right now. We should celebrate that. It's great. It's only 5% of the world population living in those countries. And half of that 5% is Brazil. So the others are sort of these Seychelles, those kinds of islands, small island countries and all that. So it's a little bit, in comparison to all the big countries in the world that have been autocratizing or are right now, have been like Turkey, it's just gone down and stay very low now, or Russia that was autocratizing from a mediocre level to really terrible under Putin, or Modi's India, where democracy, by our measures at least, has now been lost. It cannot really be counted as a democracy anymore. So in comparison, the sort of the bright spots, although they're there and we should celebrate that, they are not that many. Those are some of the highlights from this year's democracy report, Democracy Winning and Losing at the Ballot. It's all available at the website. The data is available, all reports, scientific journal articles and everything you can find on the website. If you don't like to download 31 million data points and open your statistical software, write code, we have these online tools. So you can access all the 35 million data and look at your country of favorite or compare countries with a variable graph or do maps like I did or a host of other things there. On that note, let me say thank you for listening. It's a pleasure being here today. I hope that conversation continues. Thank you.